fall guy right now? Who would I call my fall guy? Who? I don't know. Definitely Xfinity. Fuck him with a shovel. Chris Carter. Remember him? Remember in 2014 when he had these words of wisdoms to say to the kids? Do you remember this? A great moment in role model history. Here is NFL Hall of Famer Chris Carter wearing a gold jacket, echoing this famous line.
If you're going to have a crew, make sure you know who's going to be the fall guy. Okay? I know none of y'all going to never drink, lay. I know none of y'all going to never use no drugs and everything. All y'all going to go to Bible study. I realize that, but still get you a fall guy.
Get you a fall guy. And that's what the Houston Texans made Bobby Slowik after last season. Never got a chance to take a look at the big piece that DJ Bien-Aimé put together on ESPN.com talking about the Texans and their decision to move on from Slowik, why they decided to do it. But this was a pretty detailed piece outlining a lot of things that we had heard hints about over the course of this past season, but nothing quite on record. And here, really, no one's still quite on record. But players were out on Bobby Slowik. A quote from a team source. Is it a player? Assistant coach? We simply weren't good enough offensively. We had all season to make adjustments and improvements, and it never happened. Why did they never happen? Was it really as simple as it's just Bobby Slowik that never happened? I have a hard time believing it's just Bobby Slowik. I really do. He was the very convenient scapegoat all season long. He's the very convenient fall guy for the Texans this past season. Was it all on him? Is it really too much to point a finger at D'Amico Ryans? Or, on top of that, was it really too much to point a finger at C.J. Stroud, who certainly has had better years than this one that he's coming off of? I never thought it was, but I'm just a simple sports talk show host. The host of a radio show from noon to 3, and when my internet works, hosts a live stream on this platform too. More from this piece. As the struggles mounted, wrote DJ Bien-Aimé of ESPN, some players lost faith in Slowik, a team source said. From what I understand, they lost a little bit more than faith in Slowik as this season went along. There was one moment where, from what I know, he tried to rally everybody together, and it seemingly backfired. Before D'Amico Ryans fired Slowik, continues DJ Bien-Aimé, Ryans asked players for their opinions and didn't get many ringing endorsements. Quote, I don't think we had a true identity of what the fuck we wanted to do, one player told ESPN. Not even a specific idea of what you want to do. I do think the idea of an identity is overrated. I say that as somebody who grew up rooting for the New England Patriots. I think that your offense should be based off of what the weakness is of the team that you go up against. It makes you unpredictable. And if you have a good enough quarterback, especially one who is smart, which we think C.J. Stroud is, you should be able to regularly change things up. The quarterback's going to make plays for you. And you just continue to attack the defense where they're at their weakest. And I think that's what you're getting in Texans offensive coordinator Nick Caley. This is Caley at his introductory press conference, which took place last week.
I'm very eager. I'm excited for the opportunity. It's a great opportunity, great people in this organization, and, really looking forward to working, obviously, with CJ. Tremendous talent, competitor. You talk about an ultimate competitor, tough, instinctive, can make plays. So I'm very excited. And as a first-time coordinator, to answer your second part of the question, really excited to get an opportunity to evolve this scheme and put, it's not going to be my spin. It's going to be what's best for our players, and it's always going to be what's best for our players. No, we're not pounding a square peg into a round hole. It's going to be based on the strengths of our quarterback, the players, and the guys on this team. So that's what it will always be, designed around.
No square peg in a round hole. Everyone had a giant pants tent over those comments. And we got more from Nick Caley, where he doesn't really define the offense. He says, hey, this is Houston's offense when asked about it. Here is, again, the offensive coordinator of the Houston Texans.
Scheme based on what we do. And I don't say that to – it's going to be Houston's. It's going to be our scheme based on what we do. And I don't say that to throw any curveballs. It really is. I mean, my history dating back to when I first got into the National Football League under Coach Belichick is we were going to be a game plan team. If that meant we were going to run duo and gap schemes and run the ball 45 times to win the game, then that's what we were going to do. If we had to run more perimeter plays, wide zone, and we felt that was going to give us the edge, we were going to do that. It was all going to be based – we were going to ask our guys to do what they do well, but it was going to be based on what we do to help us win. And at the end of the day, we want to win, and that's priority for us.
All those things sound great. All the buzzwords. It's Houston's offense. We're going to do what we do best. We're going to have foundations and pieces that you want to hang your hat on that are probably from either New England, Los Angeles, a little bit of both. We're a game plan team, and we're always going to do what's best for our players. You like hearing all of those things. And it does stand to reason that since this is his first year as an offensive coordinator, that Nick Caley will at least get two to be offensive coordinator to work with C.J. Stroud. But back to this piece from DJ Bieneme where Bobby Slowik is all the way thrown under the bus. C.J. Stroud apparently was very limited in this Texans offense, which is something that also was hinted at a few times over the course of the regular season. Writes DJ Bieneme, C.J. Stroud wasn't allowed to change protections at the line of scrimmage often in Slowik's offense. It was the center's responsibility. A lot of the calls were considered basic, according to a team source. Basic in quotation marks. Basic in a derogatory way. As simple as having three offensive linemen zone blocking to one side, while the backside blockers were one-on-one with the backside rushers. I don't know enough about offensive line play to know what the hell that means or to explain it to you with a chart or something like that. But if people inside the room were calling it basic, and clearly they didn't think much of Bobby Slowik and the offensive line coach Chris Strausser, which is why Nick Caley is now the offensive coordinator and is why Cole Popovich is now the official offensive line coach. More from this piece by DJ Bieneme as Bobby Slowik, the dead horse, is beaten over and over again. The lack of communication with those blocking plans versus stunts led to free rushers, which is why C.J. Stroud faced 52 unblocked pressures, second most in the NFL, according to Next Gen Stats. Damn. That's a lot. Honestly, I thought he would be first in the NFL in terms of unblocked pressures faced, but the basic offensive line scheme that C.J. Stroud wasn't in command of got his ass beat a lot of this past season. More from this DJ Bieneme piece talking about Bobby Slowik's failures in 2025. There were differing opinions on why Stroud's play tailed off, but none of the sources ESPN spoke to believe it's a talent issue. Multiple team sources believe Slowik was trying to make Stroud a system quarterback against trying to get him to play more naturally, which is being a playmaker and pushing the ball down the field. You know, that last part sounds really basic too. I know that the offensive line was described as basic. That seems like really basic analysis of what Stroud's doing. Oh, he wanted him to be a game manager. Did he really want him to be a game manager? I'm sure he wanted Stroud to be the best quarterback he possibly could be. A system quarterback, game manager, like those are synonymous. I really doubt that Slowik was going out of his way to make that happen. Really doubt that, given the skills that we know Stroud has. Effortless ability to throw the football, pretty strong, can extend plays, can shake tackles. Not exactly a runner, but can run if he needs to. There's a lot of things that he brings to the table. And I'm surprised that that is the mentality that people thought Bobby Slowik had. You know, don't you think it's almost convenient to say, yeah, he was really just trying to hold him back? He might have unintentionally held him back, but bizarre. A team source said Bobby Slowik overcomplicated reads, which didn't allow C.J. Stroud to play fast. That is understandable. But if the reads are being made by the center, which is what it sounds like what reads was Stroud making and what adjustments could he even make at the line of scrimmage given the way that this offense is being described to us, at least in this piece by DJ Bien-Aimé, which is the nail in the coffin of Bobby Slowik's tenure as offensive coordinator of the Texans. He has been made the fall guy. I mean, this is a pretty brutal expose on him. Chris Strausser also took some shots too, former offensive line coach who retired. Trusting Strausser's approach wasn't easy for some players either, according to a team source, as he struggled to connect with the offensive line. Struggled to connect with the offensive line is a very lame complaint, and that sounds like it's coming directly from the offensive line. What, the offensive line coach has to connect with you? No, he has to tell you what to do. You're paid millions. Do your fucking job. The offensive line struggled so much this past season. So seeing that line in this piece bothered me a little bit. And sure, maybe the scheme's terrible, whether that's on Bobby Slowik or Chris Strausser. Up for debate, but I know the offensive linemen were still there. This passage continues talking about Chris Strausser struggling to connect with the offensive line. But the woes weren't all on Slowik or Strausser. Sometimes players failed to execute. Yeah, that happened a lot. This article continues. Adjustments didn't happen. The Texans averaged 13 points in the first half, 8th best, but once defenses countered in the second half, they averaged 7.5 points last in the league. I do think that the idea of halftime adjustments is a little bit overrated. It's we talked about basic a little bit earlier here. I think it's a basic thing that a lot of people say, but think about it from this perspective. Halftime's 12 minutes long. You're spending 2 minutes getting back to the locker room. You're spending 2 minutes getting back out on the field. What are the adjustments really that are happening in that moment right there? The adjustments are made game long. Halftime's short in the NFL. It's not college football. College football, you actually might have a little bit more time to do it. High school even too. NFL, it's a quick halftime. You get back out there. You get back to work. It's all about what the coach does over the course of the game. And I think that you could definitely argue Slowik wasn't making a lot of adjustments over the course of the game, given the way that defenses did figure him out in the second half. But halftime has that arbitrary point to say, hey, the adjustments weren't good. Not entirely, I think, a fair way to present things. But whatever the case, the Texans clearly thought that that Slowik struggled to adjust things as the game went along. So I'm curious, just reading that article, and you can check it out at ESPN.com. DJ's a friend. I'm curious as to what's next, because as I said a little bit earlier, the idea that it's just on Bobby Slowik and not at all on C.J. Stroud or DeMeco Ryans, what went down this past season, I just do not buy that. It's only on Slowik. But you got to protect the most important pieces in the organization. The quarterback, C.J. Stroud, is the most important person in the Texans organization right now. Head coach DeMeco Ryans is number 2. Then after that, it's general manager or vice president of operations, whatever his title is, Nick Caserio. Do you think any of those guys would perhaps say the Texans fail to get past the second round of the playoffs or even make the second round of the playoffs this coming year? They're disappointing along the way. Who do you think would be the next person that gets got? Because I know a lot of people would say Nick Caserio, and that does seem logical. But I'm going to play a couple of clips that I've seen over the last couple of days. Nick Caserio seems to have a very strong relationship with DeMeco Ryans. Here he is on Todd McShay's podcast on, I believe, The Ringer, also Spotify, as part of the decision-making series, talking with McShay about the synergy that he has with D'Amico.
We have a very good synergy. We communicate a lot, and I think we're very respectful of one another. D'Amico's an incredible human being. He's a phenomenal coach, but he's an incredible human being. And I think he has a unique perspective, and I've always viewed my role, even when I was working with Coach Belichick, it was a supporting role. So my job is to help support the head coach. And because of my background, that synergy between coaching and scouting and personnel kind of was able to lend a little different perspective. So we want the input of the coaches. They're intimately involved. What we try to do is pare it down and say, here, focus on this cohort of players. Go ahead and go through your evaluations. Then we meet as a staff, and they
blah, 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 blah. Nick tends to say more words than he needs to there. Texans asking, why can't I send a super chat? Good question. We had issues with that yesterday. I'm not 100% sure why. I'll work on that. Again, we're having all sorts of fucking technical difficulties with this stream the last couple of days, this week specifically. I think that when I've scheduled posts, it's been able to do super chat, but when I am just posting straight through restream, it's not working. So apologies on that front. But anyway, you just heard from Nick Caserio, head coach of the Houston Texans. Head coach, Jesus Christ. I'm all over the place too because I'm so mad about all this crap I'm trying to overcome on the fly. I need someone to take care of this shit for me. I really do. It sucks doing it all on your own. Anyway, no one gives a shit, Paul. Get back to talking about what you were about to talk about. So, Nick Caserio, you heard there. I mean, very strong compliments of D'Amico Ryans. Very strong compliments there. And there's been a lot of that over the last couple of days. He's also was on Payne and Pendergast. He was describing the kind of players that he wants, and this is why I think while Nick Caserio would be a logical next fall guy, say the Texans underachieve this coming season, I don't think it's going to be him. Here's more Nick with Sean Pendergast and Seth Payne.
We want them to be true to themselves and who they are. And look, players that play in the NFL, you probably have a little bit of a screw loose. That's okay. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. You just want to make sure that you're a good teammate, you prioritize others above yourself, and you can go out there and execute the job and the task that you're asked to do. Like, in the end, that's the most important thing. We don't want just a bunch of choir boys walking through this building. Like, you need an edge. Anybody that watches us play on defense sees that we play fast, we play physical, we play with an edge.
Talking about the choir boys for a moment, you guys want to see something pretty cool? And I get it. Like, this is a little bit disingenuous, but I'm not going to actually it. I'm just not. Okay? Did anyone see this post by the Pro Football Network? I mean, it's awesome. If you wish that the Houston Texans would be, I don't know, a little more cool, put on a leather jacket, pop the collar. This is from the Pro Football Network. With the 2024 season wrapped up, here are the most fined teams of the year, according to the Action Network. The Texans recorded their highest total in fines in 5 seasons and were the only team to exceed $1 million in fines. Hell yeah, brother! Whether it's from doing drugs, performance-enhancing ones, illicit substances of abuse, or nearly decapitating Trevor Lawrence. Lots of fines over the course of the year. Azeez Al-Shaair punching a bear on the sideline. Nico Collins slapping a bear in the face. Hell yeah. Choir boys no more? Houston Texans? Hell yeah, dude. Anyway, more from Nick Caserio on with Payne and Pendergast. This is, again, where he starts to compliment D'Amico Ryans and why I'm having a hard time buying that the next fall guy for the Houston Texans would be Caserio. Here we go. Over on the old Texans flagship.
To the consternation of some people, apparently, throughout the course of the league. But when you play defense, you play with your hair on fire and you play with an edge. and you want the other team to feel you. So who are the players that have those qualities? You can be a maniac on the football field, and then off the field, you can be one of the best guys ever and you want to go hang out with and have a beer or bring to church or whatever it is. And we have a number of players like that. And I would say there's no more embodiment of that than our head coach. The best human being, the best person ever. Everybody loves him. He's got a tremendous way about football field. I mean, you played with him. I mean, he played physical. He plays with an edge. He coaches with energy. He has passion. Like, that's what football is about.
It's also about fun. That's what Bobby Slowik at least used to say. That's what C.J. Stroud wanted to get back to doing. Football is also about football, per our good friend, the dearly departed Bobby Slowik. But, I mean, Caserio just compliments the shit out of D'Amico Ryans there. I think that they have a really good relationship, and I do not think that if things hit the fan this coming season that the two will end up splitting. Here is more Nick Caserio with Payne and Pendergast talking about collaboration with D'Amico Ryans, the head coach of the Houston Texans.
Anything in the football operation, playing, coaching, scouting, football operations, how we structure the program, I think the unique thing about the relationship that D'Amico and I have, we're sounding boards for each other, and we respect each other's position about different topics. And we're going to talk, there was some level of involvement, in the end, like D'Amico made the decision that he felt was best for the Houston Texans and our football team. And I've talked about this on this show. My fiduciary responsibility is to the organization and to support D'Amico in any way possible and to be there as a resource. And we're a resource for one another. And that's how we kind of go about our business on, just about everything.
More compliments. They do seem to have a very good relationship. Now, I understand some of the reasons that you might point to Nick Caserio and say, well, he's the next natural fall guy. Look at the offensive line, how shitty it has been, how much it's underachieved. I get it. It's very highly paid. I understand that you might say, well, Laramie Tunsil's not a Nick Caserio edition. That's a Bill O'Brien edition. And that's really the only good offensive lineman that they have. Otherwise, it's been at left guard Kenyon Green, first-round draft pick, bust at this point in time. It's Juice Scruggs. Has a second-round pick. You'd like a little bit more. Optimally, it's hard to find a good player in the second round. It's hard to find a good player anywhere. Shaq Mason's fallen off of a cliff from last year to this year. Titus Howard is overpaid. And Blake Fisher, who is stepping in at right tackle, looked pretty green in his first season. And he had a good amount of time to play, just given the way things had to be shuffled around by the end of the year. So Nick Caserio is the one who brought these guys in for the most part. He also traded a second-round pick that the Texans won't have in this year's draft for Stephon Diggs, who is now a free agent. And you could make a strong argument that that trade was a failure, even if it made sense to go get Diggs for a second-round pick. He played 8 games for you. Football gods sometimes are going to fuck you over, but that wasn't a success. Joe Mixon, success. Nico Collins, success. Dalton Schultz, not a success. Finding Tank Dell, success, but Tank Dell's not out there anymore. The offense is in a bind. And yeah, Nick Caserio's fingerprints are on that. Now, again, he's brought in guys like Will Anderson, like Derek Stingley. They've nailed some picks. I thought Danielle Hunter was a great addition last offseason. Kamari Lassiter's been really good. Kalen Bullock had a good rookie year. Jalen Petre's been really good for the Texans to this point. They really like him too. So it's not like Nick Caserio hasn't had his fair share of hits in the draft. It's more, do you look at him as the reason that the offense is where it is? And theoretically, you could. You theoretically could point the finger at him, say the Texans do not go where they need to go next year, which is further. Got to hold them to a higher standard. It'll be a disappointment if they're out in the second round again, or if they don't make the second round, let alone if they don't make the playoffs. So, who are the most logical fall guys after Nick Caserio? Is it the highly paid offensive line? Is it Gerard Johnson? The quarterback coach? Is it Cole Popovich? We shall see. Some comments here on YouTube. Texans says, if they can't block, they can't block. If Diggs doesn't play this year, we don't get to the playoffs. Yeah, he was a big part of the 5-1 start, that's for sure. Take away Diggs, we don't win our division. We're not missing all of our players, just some of them. Relax. I'm not saying they're missing on a bunch of them. I'm just asking a question. Who would be the next fall guy? Say things do not go according to plan this coming season. Casario's probably on that list, but I think it's definitely more about some of these guys on the offensive line. I don't know if it would be Laramie Tunsil, but Titus Howard seems a natural one if he even makes it into this coming season. Shaq Mason, I don't think will be on the team this coming season. I think they will move on from him. But again, we will see. But the offensive line men and Cole Popovich, the new head offensive line coach, I don't think Popovich will get more than a year. Popovich was the assistant offensive line coach this past season, and from what I understand, he didn't exactly see eye to eye with Bobby Slowik, which I think helped him stick around. But now you got to wonder about, over the course of this year, is this going to go the way that they envision it could, where you don't know if Diggs is going to be back, you don't know if Tank Dell is going to play, and you have some serious limitations. We shall see. I want to shift into talking about the Houston Astros for a moment. Isaac Paredes is the Astros' new third baseman, and he met with Astros media. And listen, I'll be honest, I don't know a lick of Spanish. Duolingo has not helped me out so much, and I haven't really used Duolingo a lot of late. But through his interpreter, here is Isaac Paredes, who you'll see pictured to the left, talking about stepping in and for Alex Bregman, who is now with the Boston Red Sox.
No pressure. My respects to Alex Bregman. He's a great ball player, great career, but there's no added pressure. I'm just ready to replace him at third base and do whatever the team do. That's for the team.
I'm ready to replace him at third base. I mean, they're big shoes to fill. If he's saying he feels no pressure, good. It's a lot of pressure to step in for a guy who's been a part of this team for a very long period of time and come into a new clubhouse and do some of the things that you once did not too long ago. Joe Espada had told him earlier this week, hey, man, don't be like the guy who was there the last couple of years. Don't try to be that guy. Yeah, I get that. Don't try to be someone that you're not. Paredes is 26 years old. He's not a very good defender at third base, especially compared to Alex Bregman, who just won the Gold Glove at the position. But the more I've been thinking about Paredes, the more I feel like Dana Brown actually might have a good plan to get the Astros back on the right track this coming season. Everyone's talking about with Isaac Paredes that the guy pulls the ball. I think he pulls the ball 49% of the time. And with the power that he pulls it with to left field, and if you take a look at where he generally hits the ball, Minute Maid Park is a fantastic park for him. Just like Tropicana Field when he was with the Rays was a fantastic park for him. He had a bunch of home runs that he pulled to left field while at the Trop. And the Trop, left field, has the second shortest left field fence of all venues. I think the Astros are the shortest because their wall isn't as high as the Green Monster, which is also a pretty short wall and definitely a beneficial one for Alex Bregman. But that's what everyone's been talking about. Ooh, Isaac Paredes, he pulls the ball to left field. Hell yeah. But when you look at Isaac Paredes, you should be looking at something else. And this actually makes me feel like, for a change, Dana Brown, who puts his foot in his mouth a lot, makes a lot of promises that he probably can't deliver on, actually has a good plan. Something that frustrated me last year, the Astros were very impatient at the plate. Jose Altuve is your leadoff hitter. He swings at everything. Yainer Diaz swings it a lot. Jeremy Pena swings it a lot, though he got better over the course of last year. You need guys who are going to work counts, who are going to wear pitchers out. Because when you try to force things, and it felt like the Astros were doing that a lot last year, you make a job for a pitcher a lot easier. Isaac Paredes, among all hitters in baseball, averaged the most pitches per plate appearance. This guy's a tough out with one of the top walk rates in baseball, 11.9%. It's impressive. That's 10th among all baseball players. And again, no hitter in baseball averaged more pitches per plate appearance. So if Dana Brown, general manager of the Astros, is telling Joe Espada, manager of the Astros, to tell the guys, hey, we want you to see more pitches, this is one guy to start up that process. And another guy who will help with that process, Christian Walker. Christian Walker is 10th on that list in terms of pitches per plate appearances. Fantastic. You brought in two guys like that for 2025. If you want to stop being the team that swings at fucking everything, having these two guys in the lineup is a great way to start. Then factor in how Paredes fares in left field. And if you want to have a hipster, this guy is the key to the Houston Astros season, you're not saying Jose Altuve and what he does in left field. You're not saying Yordan Alvarez or Hunter Brown or Josh Hader or Framber Valdez. If you're trying to be a hipster and take the long odds, Isaac Paredes might be the most important Astro this year. But you have to be a hipster, the fedora-wearing kind, to, I think, officially go that far. Some comments. Texan says, this lineup might oddly work. Amazing. It could. I'm wondering where Paredes fits in. Does he bat third? Does he bat second? I know Jeremy Booth of KHOU, who regularly comes on my radio show with Joe George. He's of the belief that you want to have someone in front of Yordan Alvarez who can draw out long counts and can give him an opportunity to, instead of behind Jose Altuve in the 2-hole, see as many pitches and figure out a pitcher. But the Astros are taking a more analytic-based approach, I think, going into this year. I think they look at Yordan Alvarez, who they moved around in the lineup a couple of times, as a guy that they want to give as many at-bats to as possible. So they're probably going to have him batting second after Altuve to get the most at-bats he possibly can. Will that work? I don't know. It might make more sense to have Paredes in between the two, but we'll see. I'm not really the biggest lineup hot take guy. Justin Singleton comments, the manager didn't know what lineup worked the best. Talking about Joe Espada. Yeah, that's true. I mean, Bregman in the 2-hole, the Astros had their best record when he did that. You think Ron Washington would have been better for the Astros? I don't know about Ron Washington. I think Ron Washington's a vibes guy. And, considering you've got running the show and Jim Crane, a guy who's a bit of a vibes guy, a little bit reactionary, it probably would have made more sense to go the direction that they went with Espada as manager. Would have been cool to bring in someone who's fun like Ron Washington, but I don't know that necessarily makes you better as a team. I wanted to touch on some things that Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred had to say over the course of the past week. He was meeting with baseball media at some sort of event in, I want to say, where was it? Phoenix, Arizona. What was that noise? I'm not 100% sure. That must have been from Twitch. And he had some very interesting things to say specifically about the Los Angeles Dodgers. He complimented them. And you know what? He's right to compliment them. I know that's far-fetched to say, right? Paul, why would you say that about the Dodgers? They're cheating, just like the Astros used to. Well, hang on. Here's Rob Manfred when asked about the Dodgers and all of the spending they've done to give themselves a payroll that's $70 million more than every team in baseball.
The Dodgers have gone out and done everything possible, always within the rules that currently exist, to put the best possible team on the field, and I think that's a great thing for the game. That type of competitive spirit is what people want to see. By the same token, I said this at the owners' meetings, I'll say it again, it's clear that we have fans in some markets that are concerned about the ability of the team in their market to compete.
Whose fault is that? Because the first part there, he compliments the Dodgers, and he should compliment the Dodgers. The Dodgers are spending. You should want your team to spend. Fuck off with this, oh, they're being irresponsible with it. It's not your money. If they spend big, that's great. That means they care. It means they want to win. It means that they're not all about profits, which is what a lot of these teams are all about these days. And it is disappointing, isn't it? That profits seem to be a priority over winning. Here's more Rob Manfred talking about some of those frustrated fans who look at the sport and don't think they have a chance to compete.
With the financial resources of the Dodgers, and I think if we've been consistent on one point, it is we try to listen to our fans on topics like this, and I have heard people on this, believe me, I get a lot of emails about it.
I'm sure that those emails, though, are largely coming from baseball owners who do not like that the Dodgers are doing things that they are not willing to do themselves. And yeah, I think it's fair to label it like that. Because ultimately, if you are the Los Angeles Dodgers, you are doing everything in your power to win. Why aren't all the other teams of baseball doing the same thing? You know? Like, that part actually does bother me. Why is that the way that you operate? Why are you going about things from the perspective of, I guess we could go all in, but I don't know. There's a lot of players that we know we're just not going to be able to sign. We're just not going to be able to figure it out. Here's more from Rob Manfred at this meeting in Phoenix, Arizona. This time, he's asked a question.
How do you define competitive balance? It's a term used a lot. What does it mean to you?
Look, it means a lot of different things. Quantitatively, we often talk about not having repeat winners. I think that's important. There are other more sophisticated measures in terms of, the winning percentages and how they're spread. But maybe as important as any of those is the perception of the fan in the market. When you take the free agent market as an example of it, right? You sign a free agent, you don't know what you're going to get on the field. He may or may not make you better. But at least during the winter time, it generates a certain excitement that's good for your market. It gives fans the impression that you're trying, and that's important to the business as well. So there's a lot of different pieces to that phrase, competitive balance, in my view.
That last part, I think, is really important. That last part where he's talking about competitive balance. He wants all these other owners to actually spend money. And he should, but he doesn't know how to tell them to do it. And he's going to have to figure out how to make that happen. He's really going to have to figure it out. I don't trust him to do it, but unlike most times that we hear from Rob Manfred, I at least respect that he is trying to nudge some of these owners who, quite frankly, do not do their due diligence when it comes to trying to put a competitor together. They're not spending money. This might be a bit of a biased source here, but this is Astros nemesis, at least this offseason. Super agent Scott Boras, who some believe is the reason that Alex Bregman is now with the Boston Red Sox more than anything else on the Foul Territory podcast.
And when we look at the number of teams that spend above 50%, you would guess how many? You would think a lot? No, it's a very small number. When you look at the number of teams that spend 40% or below, you're going to find, shockingly, some amazing. The Yankees spend 40%. They used to spend 55%. You're going to have Boston in that area, but you've got a number of teams that are spending below 100 million. For example, last year there were 6 teams spending below 100 million, and the money they get from the general fund is above that. So We really need to have a competitive commitment measure, a metric to say on your 40-man roster, how much of your revenues are you spending?
And the problem here in the way of that actually happening is that these owners are never going to release their books. They're just not. Rich people don't do that. They pay so that they never have to. They find loopholes to get around it. There's a reason that they have the money that they do. They've done a good job stockpiling it, and they continue to find ways to stockpile more and more of it, whether it's just actual cash or it's in investing in real estate and a variety of different other things. So I like that Boris pointed that out, especially the fact where you got the 6 teams that are spending less than $100 million on the payroll. Teams that generally, when you see any young star player go through the ranks of that system, you're like, oh, well, that guy's going to be gone fairly soon. There's a lot of teams in baseball where that's the expectation. A guy comes up from the minor leagues, homegrown, and 5-6 years later, you know that guy's going to be gone. Sucks. It sucks. Knowing that a star player that you developed is going to leave because he's going to ask for $500 million and probably not even get it in that next location. So how do you change that? I don't know, but something does need to be moved, and I don't know that Rob Manfred, the commissioner of baseball, is going to be willing to do that. Boris wasn't done on the Foul Territory podcast. Here is Boris talking about that ownership revenue that he thinks owners are rather shady about. What actually is revenue and what actually isn't. I was talking about that a little bit ago. Here is Super Agent Scott Boris again on the Foul Territory podcast.
First of all, when we discuss CBAs, we have to talk about the business of baseball. We don't talk about labor only. We talk about, in the NFL and the NBA and the NHL, they have hard caps. And guess what? They had lockouts of 136 days in the NFL, 161 days in the NBA, and in the NHL, 119 days. So we know that in the relationship with labor, hard cap or no cap, we still have labor relations to conduct. What are the principal problems in a CBA negotiation? They are always based upon, we have to understand that owners are talking about what we do, what they have. Well, what do they have? Revenue definition is a monster. And it's something where we have now all of the clubs wisely using the CBA and saying, how can I divert revenues? Real estate. A club has maybe, I bought the club for $500 million. I'm now worth $2.5 billion. I have $2 billion in equity that I can do what? I go out and borrow money. I invest in real estate near the ballpark, or I grow.
Jim Crane's doing that.
Enterprises near the ballpark that generate revenues. I deduct the cost of the expense to the franchise and reduce my profits, saying that this is debt alone I have on the team. And in fact, they're using their equity to grow proximity-based wise business decision where they're making millions that aren't included in the revenue. So when we talk about revenue definition, we have a broad issue with how we define that.
I'm not going to act like I 100% understand everything Scott Boris said there, but the meat and potatoes of that is that owners are crafty and they will find ways to make it look like they are spending while actually increasing in value, making profit in a different kind of way. So, look, they got to be creative to keep earning in a sport where you play 162 games and you are depending a lot on the amount of people who go to watch your games live, and then you're depending on TV deals, and you don't 100% know how to work the streaming deals. They're still being figured out. So this isn't me defending them. This is me just sort of explaining their perspective on it. But what's really frustrating is if you are a fan base of the majority of baseball teams, there's no one there to force ownership groups to spend. Not that that necessarily guarantees success, but it does at least drum up excitement, as Boris had mentioned earlier, for an organization. and then they cry as if they're poor because they're still making profits elsewhere, whether it's through the revenue sharing money that they get, the revenue distribution, or it's through all the means that Boris just laid out there. And it's bullshit. It is bullshit. At least for the paying consumer. And not everyone understands that because it's kind of difficult to explain to the average person. You know, no one has time to listen to a thesis about like how the owners are finding ways to cheap things out, you know? So, more from Rob Manfred, who, again, I'm going to give some credit for, at the very least, gently nudging owners towards spending here and complimenting the Dodgers for spending, which he should. Here he is being asked about the disparity between teams in the sport.
How comfortable are you with a sport that allows for that kind of disparity?
Yeah, I think that disparity, it should be. It certainly is at the top of my list of concerns about what's going on in this sport. When I say I can't be critical of the Dodgers, they're doing what the system allows. If I'm going to be critical of something, it's not going to be the Dodgers, it's going to be the system.
But he should be critical of the owners. The system is being exploited by the Dodgers. The system is also being exploited by the owners who don't spend money. And to me, that is bullshit. You can watch along on YouTube at Paul Gallant, on Twitch at Gallant Says, on Facebook at Paul Gallant Sports, on Instagram at Sports Gallant, and on top of that, did I say Facebook? At Paul Gallant Sports. There you go. If you have a comment, you can add it in. I guess the super chat for the second straight show is not working. We've had a lot of technical difficulties the last couple of days. If you watched the beginning of the show, you might have seen me having a little mini meltdown. That's always fun. I watch Paul because I like to see him get angry and throw things. Justin Singleton comments, profits over people, which means the fans. A lot of leagues have overlooked the fans, especially the NBA with the All-Star festivities. The NBA just needs to stop all these things that they're trying with the All-Star festivities because they've gotten to the point now where the players have to be over-incentivized to do anything. Anything. Before the playoffs, getting a player to get out of bed. It's tough. And that's basically what they're doing. Nick Gamboa says, yeah, owners got to spend the damn money. I agree with you, Paul. But not many of them do. And what's the way that you shame them into spending? Because Manfred's not going to do it. I almost feel like you need to have someone who's, as commissioner of baseball, a billionaire. Someone who actually has as much money as a lot of these owners who doesn't give a shit if they clap back at him or try to get him fired. You need somebody who's powerful. And Manfred's not. Manfred's can't even stand up to the players union, let alone the owners, and get them to spend money. So who could actually fill this role and force the owners who don't spend to actually spend? And that I honestly don't know. Justin Singleton says, Scott's got a Nick Casario vest on. El Mimo says he looks like an orc. Scott Boras from Lord of the Rings. That's mean. That's mean. So we got the Four Nations Cup as part of the NHL's All-Star break, with the puck dropping in, I want to say, about 13 minutes or so. And it's led to some interesting takes. You know, if you have a take, and that take is political in nature, say it with your chest. Can we stop trying to be cute and subtle? I understand that when you're talking about hockey, if you're one of the people on those Speak for Your Pizza TV shows, there's a lot you don't know. I'd admit I don't fucking know shit about hockey. But people pulling fast ones like this by Molly Queerum, this deserves an eye roll. Can you at least elaborate on what we all know you're trying to say here, Molly?
It's just interesting to me that certain sports you're allowed to fight and other sports
That's
could
fair.
never happen.
And by the way,
Optics! Yikes.
In international competition over the last 50 years, they've had a total of 5 fights. USA and Canada, they had 3 and 9 seconds on Saturday night.
Chris was not listening to what Molly Querim had to say. Molly's about to slip something in one last time.
That drove me crazy. All right, number 2.
Just a little hypocrisy.
All right, number 2.
Hypocrisy. What do you mean by hypocrisy, Molly? What are you talking about? Hypocrisy. Do you feel like there should be fights in football? Good luck. They're all wearing armor. You punch somebody in the helmet, you're going to break your hand. There's skirmishes, that's for sure. There's shoving matches. We saw Aziz Al-Shaair versus the entire Jaguars sideline. But in the NBA, do you remember what's happened when there's been fights before? I mean, if you are a real historian of the game and you remember this moment between the Lakers and the Rockets back in the day, I mean, you should know this kind of stuff if you're, covering sports. You should understand why things are the way that they are. But on December 9th, 1977, there was a scuffle during a Lakers-Rocket game. Kermit Washington got hit, and he ends up punching Rudy Tomjanovich in the face. Future coach of the Houston Rockets, who would win back-to-back titles in the 90s. I'm loading the video right now. The first video I clicked on, I thought was on another website. It turns out this one's on ESPN.com. But here is the actual punch itself. That's Kermit Washington. He's talking about it. Let's get to the actual thing. So, if you're watching along, see that right there? Kermit Washington is just looking for a guy to punch. He hits Rudy Tomjanovich, who's getting in there to try to separate the fight. He drops to the ground. And I understand some people, Molly Querim could respond to me saying that this is the reason that fights stopped in the NBA and said, oh, because a black man punched a white guy. But like Molly should, in that situation right there, actually say what she is implying, what she's trying to say so subtle and cheekily. Just say that you think it's bullshit that a sport that's largely white, there's men that are fighting one another, and that in basketball, that's frowned upon, and in baseball, that's frowned upon. It's been a part of hockey for a while. I don't know why it's a part of hockey as opposed to basketball and football. Baseball has fights, actually. I don't know why it's acceptable in those. But say it with your chest, Molly. Instead of saying like, oh, I think it's hypocritical. Explain the hypocrisy. Because I don't really understand where the hypocrisy is. I think hockey's a much more physical game than basketball. What's the hypocrisy about? That we like the fights? I think we like the fights in the NBA. I think we like the fights in football. So what's the hypocrisy? Little more subtle drops before tonight's Four Nations Cup game between the U.S. and Canada. This is my guy, Nick Wright, on First Things First on Fox Sports 1. I guess a phone call was made to Team USA before tonight's game by the President of the United States. Nick mentions it here.
Canada-U.S. will face off for the Four Nations Championship tonight. Last time these two teams met, there were 3 fights in 9 seconds. There's booing of the national anthem. Evidently, the President of the United States called the U.S. and pumped them up today. Some people really like that. Some people say stick to sports, keep politics out of sports, or they actually only care about that with football and basketball.
And then he moves on really quickly after dropping that in. Nick, go in detail about that. Is Fox not letting you talk about that? Like, go on. So I saw both of these today, and okay, Molly, if you got a hot take that it's hypocritical that we accept fighting in the NHL and we don't in other sports, expand on it. And maybe that's not your role on that show because you got a bunch of people that are yelling and screaming all over each other, Stephen A. Smith and Chris Russo. So that might be a little bit difficult to navigate through. But explain the hypocrisy instead of just saying it's hypocritical and leaving it for people on the internet to decipher for themselves and embrace debate, I guess, on their own. I suppose that does create engagement. That does create conversation. And with Nick, too. Oh, elaborate a little bit. Elaborate a little bit if you're going to make that as a side point. And I get it. It's TV. People want you to stay on topic. They want you to be short and to the point. This isn't like radio. And I know Nick does his podcast, the What's Right podcast. And I think he does a good job with it. But I'd actually like to see you expand on that. Since it's an international game between the U.S. and Canada, I kind of like that the president calls. Is it political to call? Is nationalism political? Are two countries hating one another political? Because these two countries do seem to hate each other all of a sudden, the U.S. and Canada. I never thought we would have that. Maybe it's just a sports hate. Maybe it's more than that. But, I mean, we can't shit talk. Like Trump did, apparently saying, like, hey, the future governor of the 51st state can watch this game with me in Washington, D.C. if he so chooses. It's fun shit talk. It's the kind of shit talk we do with a lot of other countries, to be perfectly honest, during international events. I don't really see how it's political to call Team USA before a game, to give them a pump-up speech. But that's just me. G says baseball and basketball fights today aren't fights. Yeah, that's probably true. In baseball, there might be two guys squabbling with one another, but then they get separated eventually. In basketball, it's just a bunch of holding me back, unless it's Isaiah Stewart, who I really wish went to Syracuse. Really wish he went there. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap up today's edition of the Gallant Says podcast. I apologize for starting late, and I apologize for the technical difficulties. We started this thing 3 times before it finally actually got going. I'll try to figure out what's going on with the super chats, but if you are watching this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Do the same thing on Twitch. If you're more of a Twitch person, at Gallant Says, you can sub there. I'm also on X/Twitter, at Gallant Says. Give me a follow if you could. Or on Instagram/TikTok if you want to see clips of the show. At Sports Gallant on Instagram, at Gallant Says on TikTok. You can also catch it Facebook at Paul Gallant Sports Monday through Friday around 4 p.m. Central Time and occasionally after major Houston sporting events. It's also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts after the fact. If you haven't already, subscribe, rate, and review me on those. And if you roast my ass in the review section, I will read it. Until tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central Time, so long, farewell, and have yourselves a wonderful Thursday. Enjoy the Four Nations Cup USA Canada showdown tonight. Peace!